Okay, here we go. Chaya Sarah in a nutshell. Sarah dies at age 127 and is buried in the Machpelah cave in Hebron, which Abraham purchases from Ephron the Hittite for 400 shekels of silver. He buys an estate for a burial estate. Abraham's servant Eliezer is sent laden with gifts to Haran to find a wife for Isaac. At the village well, Eliezer asks God for a sign. When the maidens come to the well, he will ask for some water to drink. The woman who will offer to give his camels to drink as well shall be the one destined for his master's son. That was a deal. That was that Abram prays to God. That Eliezer, the servant, prays to God that I'll ask a girl for water. If she gives me and to my camels, then I know that she is the one for my master's son. Okay. Rebecca, the daughter of Abraham's nephew Bethuel, appears at the well and passes the test. Eliezer is invited to their home, where he repeats the story of the day's events. In other words, and the repetition is actually told in the Torah at great length, which is part of the something that all the commentaries address, why the repetition at such great length. We'll get to that. Rebecca returns with Eliezer to the land of Canaan, where they encounter Isaac praying in the field. Isaac marries Rebecca, he loves her, and is comforted over the loss of his mother. Abraham takes a new wife, Keturah. In the bracket, it says it's Hagar, because that's what the sages say. The sages say that Keturah is really remarrying Hagar, who he was already married to. In other words, before she was sent away, and fathers 6 additional sons. But Isaac is designated as his only heir. Abraham dies at age 175 and is buried beside Sarah by his 2 eldest sons, Isaac and Ishmael. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short. Of course, the question is where to begin. And there's some themes that pop up every year we have to address. And then there's hopefully something that we can add for this year. But the first thing that is an interesting point to point out is to begin with the name, Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah. So why do we name this parsha the life of Sarah? Because the opening statement of the parsha is Vayu Chaye Sarah. The life of Sarah was 127 years. The problem is that every single verse in the parsha, except maybe the first verse, describes the events that happen after her passing. And as such, it is strange to think about the name, to give it a name, the life of Sarah, if it's not really a parsha about the life of Sarah, it's a parsha about the passing of Sarah, right? So verse 1, and the life of Sarah was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah, but that's just sort of a summary getting us into verse 2, and Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron. So you can make an argument that it's the wrong name for the parsha. Most of the parsha discusses buying for burial, finding a wife for her son, and then even Abraham marrying another woman, sort of not about Sarah. So why the life of Sarah? So there are all kinds of interpretations. The Hasidic interpretation is that life of Sarah, ironically or not ironically, the person's life, the person's true life, you can only see after they pass. In other words, what is a person's true legacy? What is the mark that they leave on the earth? You'll see that after they pass. During their lifetime, okay, they're engaged in a certain activity or certain values, but you don't know that it's going to persevere. You don't know that it's true life. True life means it's ongoing. It's not just fleeting. So ironically, if a person can make an imprint after they pass, that is proof of that their values that they held during their lifetime is true life, meaning it's ongoing. So if that's the big idea. The big idea is that, yeah, you can see her life when her legacy continues. But if you want to get specific and you want to talk about, so how did the stories in this week's Parsha, how did they express the life of Sarah, the legacy of Sarah? So here, this takes us back to a discussion that we have had in the past, and we also may have touched upon it in previous weeks this year. Honestly, I don't remember. And that is that there is a little bit of a distinction between the mission of Abraham and the mission of Sarah. So even though they were partners, and when the Torah describes that how Abraham, when he left his birthplace and he went to Israel, he also brought along with him the souls which they made in Haran. In other words, the souls that they influenced in Haran. Who's they? They is plural, not just Abraham, but Sarah. So they're certainly a partnership. They're very much on the same page in their mission of teaching monotheism. But yet there emerges a difference between Abraham and Sarah. And that difference is specifically even more highlighted once Isaac is born. And it is expressed in last week's parsha, where Sarah wants Abraham to send away his son and his wife Hagar, and he doesn't want to. And God says, listen to Sarah. And we talked about this in the past, not this year, but we spoke about this in the past. And the conflict is as follows. When you look at Abraham, Abraham's name was initially Avram, which is the father of Aram, which is the region that he was born in. But before the circumcision, God says that he's changing his name. He's adding a letter. And he changes his name from Avram to Avraham, adding a hey. And the Torah itself, the verse itself, it offers the interpretation of what the hey represents. And it says there that Avhamon goyim netaticha, I made you a father of a multitude of nations. In other words, Abraham's mission is to influence all the nations. Abraham's mission is universal. And therefore, Abraham is not selective at all in who he interacts with. He's constantly trying to influence everybody. According to the Medrash, the guests that come to his house, he offers them water, as we read it last week, because they're still bowing to idol worship, and he wants to wash away the idol worship. According to the Medrash, they would bow to the dust of their feet, but that's another story. The bottom line is Abraham was not discriminating at all with the people he would try to influence. When it comes to Sarah, so that's Abraham, he's universal. When it comes to Sarah, so even though initially she was trying to influence everybody, but then once Isaac is born, Sarah seems to have understood that her mission is to help cultivate the Jewish people. In other words, a unique people that have a particular message and a particular lifestyle. And therefore, she becomes much more discriminating about the environment that she wants her son to raise in, to grow up in. And therefore, she wants Abraham to send away Ishmael, and also emphasize that his true heir is Isaac, because in last week's parsha it says that Ishmael is mocking Isaac, and therefore Sarah was upset. What were they mocking? What was he making fun of? She didn't like the color of her shirt. So the Medrash explains that what they're fighting about is who is the true heir of Abraham. Is it going to be Ishmael or Isaac? And Sarah insists that there's a unique, even though Abraham's influence affects the entire world, but in some sense, the broader you reach, the more diluted your message. In other words, you have to sort of make it more palpable to everybody. But you also have to have a specific people that are going to, I don't want to use the word extreme, but are going to fully embrace the legacy of Abraham. And that's Isaac. And that's why, and that's the difference between Abraham and Sarah. Abraham is looking at the universal, Sarah is looking at her own, the specific Jewish people. Now, look at this week's parsha. Throughout all the stories, you see that what is emphasized is Abraham, it comes to realize the importance of Sarah's perspective. And therefore, he wants a burial place for Sarah specifically. And he wants to get a wife for his son, but not anybody, not anyone living in the local land, but somebody specific, somebody that will be suited with her kindness to Isaac. And he specifically sends his servant away to a distant land, and he says to his servant, whatever you do, do not let my son marry a girl that is from girls of the local land, even though Abraham is about embracing everybody. Yes, but not for Isaac. And the end of the parsha, even though he remarries Hagar, he has other children, but the verse says he sends away the other children in Isaac's lifetime. He gives them gifts and sends them off during Isaac's lifetime because he recognizes that Isaac is his true heir, which was really the legacy of Sarah. And finally, I think it's the last verse, or the second to last verse of the Torah, of the Parsha, is that his sons, Abraham was buried with Seva Tova, Abraham was buried in good, ripe old age, and his sons. So what does it mean he was buried in ripe old age? So the Medrash says, and I think Rashi quotes it, that means Yishmael, who was sent away, Yishmael also repented. Both his sons repented. And then it says that his sons buried him. What order does it say his sons buried him? So it says Yitzchak v'Yishmael, first Isaac, then Yishmael. So Rashi says that this teaches that Yishmael did teshuvah. Yishmael recognized his place in the home and the place of Isaac, and therefore that Isaac is Abraham's primary heir, and therefore he allows him to go first. Sorry, it's not the last parsha, it's not the last verse, it's the last few verses. But in any case, Yitzchak v'Yishmael, this teaches that Yishmael did teshuvah and he let Isaac go before him, and that is the meaning of that Abraham was buried in ripe old age, in the sense that they did teshuvah. So I'm reading in the end of the parsha, Genesis chapter 25, verse 9. I'll share the screen in a moment if I can get there. But so just to summarize, give me just a second, excuse me. Just to summarize, so this is the end of the parsha, and again, this is the sixth reading. And Isaac and Yishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the land of Ephron, the son of Tzochar, in the Hittite, which faces Mamre. Isaac and Yishmael, Rashi quotes the Medrash, Genesis Rabbah, Medrash Rabbah, Bereshit Rabbah. From here, we may deduce that Yishmael repented and let Isaac go before him. And that is the meaning of in good old age, which is stated regarding Abraham, above 1515. Okay, beautiful. So what do we say in summary? We call the parsha the life of Sarah, because her legacy lives on. And that's how you know a person's truly alive, if their legacy lives on after their passing. What was Sarah's legacy in particular? It was the idea that Abraham, even though Abraham has a mission to influence everybody, but Abraham also has to have a sort of a higher standard for his son, because his son, Isaac, is going to be the one who's going to embrace his mission completely and wholeheartedly, and therefore is in a unique position, and therefore has to be protected in that way, and protected of the influence of Yishmael, and has to live a higher standard. And that is not a contradiction to the fact that this Abraham also has a universal message. Both are true, but they both could be simultaneous. It took time for Abraham to understand it. Sometimes took maybe till Sarah's passing for him to understand it. But that is the story in short about just the first words of the parsha, Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah. So that's the introduction. Now we're getting now we can start the parsha. Now we can start the parsha. Okay. Okay, the beginning of the parsha, the first section, the first reading is basically the negotiation of a real estate transaction. And sometimes those become complicated. And the first place that Abraham buys in Israel to settle is the cave of Machpelah, and the field that the cave is in, which is in Hebron, Kiryat Arba. And he buys that place as an estate, a burial estate for his wife Sarah, the passing of Sarah. Did Abraham buy real estate before then? I don't know. I don't think so. Abraham is a shepherd. So Abraham is on the move, and he wants to be on the move because he wants to travel and he wants to spread the message. And even where he settles, he plants a shell. Some people say it's a tent. Some people say it's a tree. In any case, he's on the move. He's not settling in one specific place. You buy an estate, that means you're planning on settling here for you and your children, and you're really anchored in this region. And this is the first place that we know that he buys and he wants to buy in the land. And you have a negotiation back and forth. It's not so easy. It takes time. And we can go through the entire negotiation back and forth, but we'll be brief because we did this in the past years. And in short, what happens is that Abraham comes to the people of the town, the children of Chet, and he says, I want to buy, can you please give me a burial estate? Verse 4, I am a stranger and inhabitant with you. Give me burial property with you, so that I may bury my dead from before you. Burial property is not the Gresh Ben's translation. Achuzat kever. Achuzat kever is an estate. Give me a burial estate with you. They say, no problem. Listen to us, my Lord. You are a prince of God in our midst. In the choicest of our graves, bury your dead. None of us will withhold his grave from you to bury your dead. Abraham is not happy. Why isn't he happy? So because he wanted to pay for it. And he says, please call Ephraim ben Sochar, let him give me the cave. I'll pay him the full price. Verse 9. For a full price, let him give it to me in your midst for a burial property. And they go back and forth. Finally, the guy says, I'll give it to you as a gift. Then Abraham says, you know what, I'm going to pay. But Abraham insists that he paid him 400 silver coins, which was a big amount for that piece of land. So that's the negotiation. That's the dance. Even before you go further, it's actually very, very interesting. Look at verse 6. And verse 6, it looks like the people in verse 6 are very, generous. Listen to us, my Lord. You are a prince of God in our midst. In the choicest of our graves, bury your dead. None of us will withhold his grave from you to bury your dead. Isn't that beautiful? Don't you see how much they respected Abraham in verse 6? So that's true. That's one way to look at it. But if you look on a deeper angle, and whenever you're dealing with real estate, you have to read any negotiation, but certainly real estate negotiation, you have to read between the lines. And one way to read this is actually it's an absolute rejection of what Abraham asked for. How is it a rejection? What word appears in verse 4 that does not appear in verse 6? So verse 4 is Abraham's request. I am a stranger and inhabitant with you. Give me a burial property with you, so that I may bury my dead before me. And I mentioned burial property is really a burial estate. Achuzah is an estate. In other words, an estate that can be inherited to later generations. What do they say? They say, no problem. Listen to us, my Lord. You're a prince of God in our midst. In the choicest of our graves, bury your dead. None of us will withhold his grave from you to bury your dead. What are they saying? Do they agree with him or they did not agree with him? He gave the proposal. Give me an achuzat kever. Give me a burial estate. They say, no problem. Take any grave you want. Okay? So it's obvious that they're not agreeing. They're not giving him an estate. What they're telling him is, take any grave you want. You want a grave, take a single grave. You have your wife, you have to bury your wife, take any grave you want. What will happen when I'll die? Oh, we'll give you a different grave. But what they're not giving him an estate. They're not giving him a place that says, this is your space here. And the commentaries explain they're certainly not selling him the estate. So there's two elements. First of all, they're not giving him an estate, they're giving him a grave. Which if it's just a grave of just one person, still doesn't make your family permanent in this space. So we'll give you any grave you want. Looks very generous, but it's really a rejection of what Abraham wants. And the second thing is they say, we're willing to give it to you, but they don't want to sell. They don't want to sell. And it takes a very long time for him, back and forth in negotiation. The lawyers have to get involved here. Eventually, they agree they take his money, but they resist. So there's two ways of understanding the resistance. Number one, you could say as follows, the more practical. They did not like to offer their burial estate to a stranger, because if you're going to offer your burial estate to the stranger, what you're saying is that stranger belongs here. If he's just a nomad and he dies, you give him a grave, but you don't give a burial estate. Burial estate means it's for your whole family. It means no matter where you guys go, you're always going to come back here to bury. So this is your region, this is your anchor. So initially they refuse that. They don't want to do that. So even though he's an important guy, Nasi Elohim, you're a prince of God, we'll give you any burial you want, but in the state they don't want to. Only because Abraham presses them, and because they respect him, eventually they have to concede. So that's the first point. Abraham is not trying to only bury his wife. He's trying to take possession or to get permission from the local inhabitants to recognize that he belongs here, because he has a divine promise that he and this land will be given to him and his descendants. But he wants that the people to recognize it, and this is the first time. If they take your money, then they agree to have you here. So that's one point, one angle. That it's a question of, are they accommodating the entire family, or are they just accommodating Abraham? And if it's the entire family, it's also not just Abraham, it's also the future generations, because it's an estate for the future generations as well. That's one angle. Another angle would be that they don't want to sell him land. They're willing to give him land, but they don't want to sell him land, because I don't know if it was exactly played out this way, but this rings true, that if you're a landowner, then you have a say in the local economy and the local politics. You get the right to vote. I don't know if they had I guess they did have a functioning democracy because they all had to come. If you read the story, he spoke to the entire people, the entire clan at the gates of the town. So let's read this. This is very interesting. So there was some form of democracy. Here we go. And Abraham arose from before his dead and he spoke to the sons of Het. Okay, that could be just a few people. Let's keep going. The people of Het answer. Let's keep going. Look at verse 10. Now Ephron was sitting in the midst of the sons of Het. And Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the sons of Het, of all those who had come into the gate of his city. In other words, this negotiation was not happening in the back rooms. It was happening at the city entrance where everybody could be there. It's in the markets, in the open market. And the commentaries explain that Abraham wants it to be in the ears of everybody because if anyone wants to protest, let them protest. And if nobody protests, means everybody agrees to the deal. So in other words, if you own land in the region, you have a say. And they don't want to sell land to Abraham because they don't think Abraham should have a say in the local economy. Why? Don't they respect him? Yeah, they respect him. But what did they tell him? They told him in verse 6, you are a prince of God in our midst. What does a prince of God mean? You're a spiritual guy. You don't know how to run the traffic. You don't know how to run the economy. You don't know when they should come take out the garbage. But we're willing to give you space, but we're not willing to sell you land, because if we sell you land, you're going to have a say in the region, and we don't want that. And Abraham insisted, no, that we want a say in the land, because the idea of Judaism is that the spirituality and the values and the connection to God is supposed to and is designed to transform the way we live in the physical world and moral life. In other words, we don't want to keep the Prince of God in the house of study or in the house of worship. The Prince of God has to influence the day-to-day life. And that's why Abraham insists that he wants to buy, because he wants his say. And eventually they agree, but not without resistance, because it was completely counterintuitive to their understanding of what it means to be a Nasi Elohim, a Prince of God. Okay, so that's a little bit about the negotiation, and why Abraham insists that he wants to buy first not only a burial spot but an estate, and why he insists that he wants to pay. And to summarize, number one, because he wants this to be an estate not just for his wife, but not just a burial place for his wife, but an estate for the entire family, which represents the idea that the children, that the local people recognize that he belongs here because this is the land that God promised him. And he wants to pay because he wants to say, look, that rhymes. Okay. He wants to pay because he wants to say in the way people live their life. He wants to vote in the city council because that's the purpose of the Prince of God, not to run away from daily life, but to influence it. So this is a little bit on the first passage on the Cape of Machpelah. There's a lot more to say, especially if we get to the Kabbalah. There's a lot more to say, but maybe we'll leave it for right now, unless anybody wants to dig further. Comments, questions, please jump in. Don't wait for the end, and then we're going to continue, hopefully, to the story of finding a wife for Isaac. Okay, so there's a lot to say, and I'm going to try to do very briefly mention something that we spoke in the past, and then I'm going to try to talk about new things that we have not spoken in the past. We've been doing this for a long time. I think we've been doing this for, 15 years. So hard to remember what we spoke about, what we didn't speak about, but every week I try to at least add something new in case everybody remembers everything, which would be a very good problem to have. We can always add new, and we always have to go back to the old, because the fundamentals we have to go back to and re-inspire ourselves. But human nature is we need a new angle as well. So I try to provide that as well for myself, because I also have to be excited. Okay, let's deal with this problem, with this portion. And the portion is, there's a problem with this portion. The problem is that it's too long. you have the entire story unfolds, and you can read it inside, but you could read it for your homework. Eliezer comes to the town. He makes a deal with God. He says, "I'm going to ask a girl for water." The one who gives me water and says, "I'll give you water, and also your camels I'll give." That's the one I'll give to. That's the one you chose for Isaac. And then you go to, and then they go, and then she finds Rebecca. This happens, and then he goes. She takes him home. He tells her brother and her mother and her father everything that happened, and repeats the entire story. And finally, they say, "Okay, yeah, it must be that it came from God. We have no choice but to agree. We're not going to interfere." And then he says, "Let's go." And she says, "Nah, let's not." And the family says, "Let's wait." Finally, he insists, "Can't you see that God made me successful? Let's go. Let me go." And finally, they agree to let him go immediately, which was against the custom. It used to be, if you want it, even once the girl consents to marriage, you give her 12 months to prepare. So they let him go. And that's the story, and he comes back. The question is, why the repetition? And why the repetition at great length? So there's the classic rabbinic answer from the Medrash, quoted in Rashi. The problem with this answer is that I'm not sure what the answer is, because it makes a statement, but it doesn't explain the statement. So the statement is as follows. Again, Rashi quotes it from the Medrash. Let me see if I can find it. Members, chapter 24, verse 42. Let's see if I can share it. Okay. This is just the middle. Why Rashi chooses to say it here is another story. We're not going to get into that right now. Here is Rashi. So this is Eliezer retelling the story. So I came today to the fountain, and I said, "O Lord God of my master Abraham, if you desire to prosper my way upon which I am going, etc., etc." Fine. We're going to skip the first 3 lines, not relevant for right this second. Rabbi Acha said, "The ordinary conversation of the servants of the patriarchs is more beloved before the omnipresent than the Torah of their sons. For the section dealing with Eliezer is repeated in the Torah, whereas many fundamentals of the Torah were given only through allusions." Again, Medrash Rabbah. What is the Medrash saying? He's saying, look, you have many important laws of the Torah that are just alluded to with one letter or one word. And yet the story of Eliezer, who's not even the patriarch, it's the servant of the patriarch, is stated twice in the Torah. How so? Why so? So what is the answer? So Rabbi Acha answers, because the ordinary conversations of the servants of the patriarchs is more beloved. Yafeh, literally yafeh, it's more beautiful. Yafeh is nicer, more beautiful. The conversations of the stories, the conversations of the servants of the patriarchs is more beautiful than the Torah of the children. So that's a wonderful answer. The problem is it doesn't answer anything, because it doesn't tell you why it's more beautiful. It says it's more beautiful, but why is it more beautiful? Why is the story of Eliezer more beautiful than the laws of the Torah? I understand the plot is better, so it's more interesting to give a class in the plot of Eliezer than the intricate laws of the Torah. But that's just a joke. I mean, yes, it's more entertaining, yes. But why is it Yafeh? Why is it more beautiful? And there are all kinds of interpretations. Obviously, what we learn from Eliezer in some ways is more beautiful than the Torah. Maybe there's deeper lessons, and everybody takes this in their own direction. And so I'm going to say 2 things on this. I'm not going to get mystical. I'm just going to say 2 things in the Pshat. Next year, we'll do the mysticism on this, if you just remind me, God willing, without a vow, if everybody's in good health. Okay, first thing is we're going to say, what is the message of the Torah? The Torah is the will of God. Okay, where do you find the will of God? In the Torah. If you want to know what God wants of you to do, then you have to look at the Torah. We discussed this in the JLI on Tuesday. Does God communicate with us? Yes, Maimonides says that we have to believe in prophecy, principle number 7, principle number 8 of the 13 principles of the Torah is that God speaks to us through the Torah. The Torah that we have was given to Moshe from Hashem. Wonderful. God speaks to Moshe. God speaks through the Torah. Beautiful. But maybe there's a deeper message in the story of Eliezer. What is the story of Eliezer? Story of Eliezer is that God operates and God can appear anywhere. In other words, divine providence, that God is sending you on a certain path and sending the right girl for you at a given time, that there's divine providence in whatever you see. That's really Eliezer's story. And maybe that message is even more important to understand. That I can't tell you I know exactly what God is signaling to me, but it's important that I understand that God speaks to us not only through the Torah, but also through what happens to us in our life. Right? You look at the mission, you look at the story of Eliezer, and it's a very interesting thing. So Eliezer makes the deal, and he says to God, he makes the prayer, and he says to God that I'm going to ask a girl for water, and the one who gives me water and says she'll give to my camels, that's the one I know is for Isaac. Okay. A girl comes out, he asks her, she's giving him the water. Now what happens? Look at the verse 21. So she's doing everything right. She finished giving him to drink, and she said, I will also draw for your camels until they will have finished drinking. And she hastened, and she emptied her pitcher into the through. And she ran again to the well to draw water, and she drew for all his camels. If you're Eliezer, wonderful. But Eliezer is actually astonished. And the man was astonished at her, standing silent, waiting to know whether the Lord has caused his way to prosper or not. Very strange verse. Why is he wondering? Let's see how Rashi translates Mishta'eh. Why is he wondering? Isn't this exactly what he asked for? Isn't this exactly what he asked for? So Rashi says Mishta'eh means that he was astonished and startled because he saw his efforts on the verge of succeeding, but he did not yet know whether she was of Abraham's family or not. So we'll leave Abraham's family alone for a moment. We'll talk about that later. But he's standing there and he's shocked. Why is he shocked? He's shocked that his plan worked. Why? Because he's shocked that something so amazing is happening, that God is sending him the right girl because he prayed for it. And he's shocked that this is happening. This is a shocking experience, that he could sense the divine hand. And maybe that's why the stories of the patriarchs, the servants of the patriarchs, are more beautiful than the words of the Torah, because the message is that we too can find the hand of God in everything we do. And wherever we are is divine providence. There's a reason why we're here. We have to find the reason. We have to influence our surroundings, etc. But maybe that's the deeper message of the Torah. Again, that's one possibility. There are many more. I'm hopefully going to take a few questions, and hopefully we'll do one more, and then we move on. Go ahead, Zach.
I want to comment that in a sense I agree with you, but if you look explaining why the story was repeated, if you look at it from literary point of view at Torah, then it's an interesting tool that I noticed after many years that some good writers use, is repeat the same story. The entire Seinfeld is based on this. Something happened, and then they meet and they talk about what happened, and then again they talk about this happened, and we watch it, and it's interesting. And the idea also, normally they talk about sex, something happened with regard to sex, and the idea is that if you repeat something and people discussing something, certain principle, then it's more emphasis subconscious on this principle. So they're talking about, you're right, they're talking about, there is a question, God said this, so how do you convince people that God said that? So it's not really a story, it's pushing, I'm sorry for this word, pushing the agenda of God, using just similar conversation, regular people, but it's very focused. The idea is to promote the idea of God.
So you're saying something very beautiful. First of all, I'm going to add to what you're saying with your permission. First of all, you're saying it's not so much about what happens in the world. When you come home and you talk about it, that's where the influence happens. I could have had a good day or a bad day. It doesn't really matter. When I come home and my wife asks you, how was your day? And now it's my choice to talk about it. That's how I define it. That's the real impression. That's where I influence myself and influence others. Beautiful. Beautiful. I just want to say, I think maybe someone else has a question, but before that, I just want to say that there's no question that the Torah, there's the literary tool here of repetition. But the sages, since they've looked very carefully, they're going to look back and say what you're saying, which is it's all about the repetition. But there's a whole industry, there's a whole genre of commentaries that explain not only is the story not repeated, but the story is a completely different story. In other words, almost nothing that Eliezer tells the family actually happened. They're very subtle differences, but we can do a few of them. It's the opposites. And maybe that's what the Torah is telling you. It's more beautiful. Learn from Eliezer. I don't want to say how to manipulate, but learn from Eliezer how to say a story and how to push your agenda and how to influence people. And I'm going to just bring a few examples in a moment or two in the limited time we have, because I still want to say something else in the last 10 minutes. But it's not just that you're right, that he's recounting and emphasizing certain things, but if you really get to it, he's actually making subtle changes, but those subtle changes are really very dramatic. And that's the fun, to think about how he changed. And when we're done, if we have the time, when we're done, you would say, it's almost striking how little of what it's like a different story. It's like, come on. It's like, it's not a mistake. If you had one change is one thing, everything is different. And the question is, why did he change? What did he understand how to get to them that he felt differently, but he knows their perspective. So he's speaking to their perspective, which is different than the reality. So there's a whole genre of commentaries. That's what people do in this week, Chayei Sarah. That's what the commentaries are doing, because it keeps people busy, because it's fascinating, because that's where you see the drama, where you see it's retold and it's told so differently, then there's obviously meaning here. But it all is based on your point, which is the objective fact, what happens, and then is how you retell it. And sometimes how you retell it is how you influence, again, yourself and others 100%. I fully agree, 100%. Go ahead, Vicky, you have a question, or we're good? We're good. Okay, so let's try to unpack a little bit of some of the changes that Eliezer does to Abraham, Eliezer does when he repeats the story. And there's two ways we can do this. So I'm asking for a vote. Thumbs up, please. One way to do it is start at the end. In other words, start at the thesis of what Eliezer is changing and then show the differences. The other way is to start with the differences, and first and wait to see if anyone's convinced that the differences are significant. And then once you agree that the differences are significant, then we could start to offer a thesis of why he would do that. So if you have a preference to one of those ways, let me know. Otherwise, we'll just have to pick one. Let's see, where to begin? Where do we start? Okay, we'll start with one. This is fun. This is a fun one, okay? But we're going to have to jump back and forth, so I apologize in advance. This is actually a very, very funny one. This is going to be fun. Okay, Hadrash's commentary. Here we go. So Eliezer comes, we're talking it the second time. He comes to the family, and he tells the family, remember, at this point, he already asked a girl for the water. She gave him water, she gave to the camels. He gave her jewelry. Then he asked, "Who are you?" And she tells him that she's the family of Nahor, meaning she's Abraham's great nephew. Okay, you cannot get it more perfect. Fine. He comes to her house. They give her food to eat. I'm reading chapter, I don't know what chapter it is, chapter 24, verse 33. So they're Abraham's family. So they're in the Middle East. They're very hospitable. So the first thing they do, they say, here's food, verse 33. And food was set before them to eat. And he said, I will not eat until I have spoken my words. And he said, speak. And he said, I am Abraham's servant. And he talks about how Abraham was very successful. He had a son. Look at verse 37. And my master adjured me, made me take an oath, saying, you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I dwell. Instead, you must go to my father's house and to my family and take a wife for my son. That's the mission. That's the mandate. What's the mandate? You must go to my father's house and to my family and take a wife for my son. Now, the reality is that Abraham told him no such thing. There's a significant change. What is a significant change? Let's find it right here. Let's go back to what Abraham actually says. I'm looking at now chapter 23, verse 4. So, and I will adjure you, this is Abraham speaking to the servant, and I will adjure you by the Lord, the God of heavens and the God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose midst I dwell. But you shall go to my land and to my birthplace. You shall take a wife for my son, for Isaac. What didn't he mention? Okay, looking at verse 4, and then you're looking at verse 38. Instead, you must go to my father's house and to my family. Nonsense. Nonsense. Abraham never said, go to my family. Abraham wants a kind girl. In that region, the girls would know the culture was very kind. Did you ask a stranger for water? They'll give you water. So Abraham says, go to my birthplace. Find someone for my birthplace. He didn't say family. Eliezer is now found the girl that happened to be kind and happened to be Abraham's great nephew. So he makes a story, pulls it out of thin air. Now, is it a lie? I don't know. I don't think Abraham meant not my family, my birthplace. Yeah, birthplace could be whatever. I don't know. This verse does not appear in Abraham's words. This is Eliezer's interpretation. One example. Go ahead, Warren. Go ahead, Warren, please. You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm looking at the stone, and verse 4 says, rather to my land and to my kindred shall you go. Isn't that a reference to his family?
It's a reference, but I don't think that's what the Hebrew says. Let's look at the Hebrew. Looking at the stone as well, page 1010. So we're looking at 109, I think. No, page
111. 111 in English.
11 verse 4. Rather to my land, to my kindred. Kindred is relatives. Let's look at verse 4. Kim el artsi del moladiti. Moladiti is a birthplace, birthland. Even in English, you would say, America is my moledet. It's my birthplace. It's my birthland. It does not mean, at least in the simple meaning, it does not mean my family. Even so that's it. Why did they translate this way in the stone? That's a good question. I don't know. In Aramaic also. Maybe because they have this question, because otherwise you have a question, what did Eliezer mean? So I guess what they're saying is Eliezer interpreted my birthplace to mean my family, my relatives. But he doesn't say that. Moladiti. Anyone here that this is, stop any Israeli in the street anywhere in Israel and say, what's a moledet? It's a birth country, birthplace, birth country. Doesn't imply family. It could be overlap. Remember, they're living in clans, so it could be that your birthplace is also your family. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying that is not something that Abraham emphasized explicitly. And that's something that Eliezer is saying explicitly to the family. Okay, I'm going to give one more subtle difference, but it's a significant difference because even though it appears subtle, in a minute we'll offer the thesis and see why it's so important. And then hopefully we still have time for other things as well. Okay, so let's look again. We're going to jump back and forth. Let's go to how he tells the story. Let's first go to the actual story. So he gets there. He prays to God. He finished speaking. Okay, what does he tell God? Let's see what he told God. So he's telling God, and it will be that the maiden to whom I will say, lower your pitcher. So I'm looking at chapter 24, verse 14. And it will be that the maiden to whom I will say, lower your pitcher and I will drink, and she will say, drink, and I will also water your camels. This is the key statement, right? This is what she has to say. Drink, and she will say, drink, and I will also water your camels. That's the key phrase. Any girl who says that gets the job. She gets the position. She gets the role. She gets the shidduch, okay? So that's what she has to say. Drink, and I will also water your camels. Her have you designated for your servant, for Isaac. Okay, does this actually happen? Forget about what he repeats the story. Does this actually happen? Spoiler alert, it does not happen. This is not exactly what happens. Something different happens, close enough, but different. What happens? So he goes to her, and he says, and the servant ran toward her, and he said, please let me sip a little water from your pitcher. Verse 18, and she said, drink, my Lord. She didn't say what he said she has to say. Right here in the bold, drink, and the highlighted, drink, and I will also water your camels. That's not what she says. She says, drink, my Lord. And she hastened and lowered her pitcher to her hand, and she gave him to drink. and she finished giving him to drink. It looks like the verse is going out of its way to emphasize this. When he finished drinking, remember, he just crossed the desert, so he probably drank a lot. When she finished giving him to drink, and she said, I will also draw for your camels until they will have finished drinking. So before we get to what happened later, what he told the family, it's interesting to note that what Eliezer tells God in his deal with God, he says, the girl's going to say, I will give you to drink, and I will also give your camels. She's the one. Did Rivka do that? Did Rebecca do that? No. She said, I will give you to drink. She gives him to drink. When he finishes, she says, I'll give it to the camels. Okay. I ask you, again, I'm not, some people would say that what she did is actually kinder to the person. Eliezer says, give me to drink and give the camels. She says, first, I'm honoring you, and then I honor your animals. I'm not putting you with the animals together. Some people think, I'm not sure everybody will agree, maybe some people won't agree, but some people think that she's going beyond what Eliezer asked. In other words, Eliezer says, what's more polite, to say, I'm going to give you and your camels, or she asked for a drink, I give you to drink. You're first. When we finish with you, I'll deal with the camels. So it could be, at least from some people would say that what she's doing is a step up. Let's go back to the story, how he's going to tell the story to the family. And of course, he's not going to say what happened because he never says what happened. There's so many other differences also, but here's just case in point. I said, I'm only bringing you two. Okay, what happens here? He's telling the family in 45. So it's again, same chapter, verse 45. I had not yet finished speaking thus in my heart. And behold, Rebecca came out of her pitcher on her shoulder, and she went down to the fountain and drew water. And I said to her, please give me to drink. And she hastened and lowered her pitcher from upon her. And she said, drink, and I will also water your camels. You already know that that's not what happened. You already know that that's what he prayed to God that should happen. But in reality, that's not what happened. So he made these two very significant, subtle differences. Some maybe I think the first one is more significant. The second one seems subtle, but it is very, very important. Why is it so important? So to understand why it's so important, we have to look at Maimonides. And Maimonides says that there's I'm sharing the screen, I believe, chapter 11. Maimonides in the laws of idol worship has this thing that you cannot let Maimonides speak for himself. Let's read number 4. It is forbidden to practice soothsaying as idolaters do. As Leviticus states, do not act as a soothsayer. What does that mean? What is meant by a soothsayer? For example, those who say, since my piece of bread fell out of my mouth, or my staff fell from my hand, I will not travel to this place today. Since if I were to go, I would not be able to accomplish my desires. So people are very superstitious. My cane fell, so I'm not walking. I'm not going on my journey today. Ridiculous. Since a fox passed on my right side, I will not go out of my door today. Since if I were to go out, I would meet a deceiver, because a fox is a sort of cunning. Similarly, this category, I'm going to skip the next paragraph just for the sake of time. Similarly, a person who sets omens for himself. For example, if this and this happens, I will do this. If it will not happen, I will not do it. And here comes a super controversial statement. As Eliezer, servant of Abraham, did, and the things of the like, all this is forbidden. What is Maimonides saying? Maimonides is saying you have to be rational. Don't be superstitious. Don't tell me because your stick fell, that's why you're going to not go on the journey. Don't tell me that. Don't make an omen that if this happens, you're going to do so and such. Such and such, that's forbidden, and like Eliezer, the son of Abraham. And as you can imagine, this drew a lot of fire. The people that comment on Maimonides disagree with him. How could you say that? Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, permitted a sin? Impossible. So they dance around, what's the answer? What's going on? Why was it okay? Why is it not okay? All this, we're going to try to clear this up very quickly. And what's going to be is like this. There's two types of things. There's an omen that's not logical, it's superstitious. That is prohibited. Then there's an omen that's logical, that's permitted. What was Eliezer's? There's two stories of Eliezer. There's what Eliezer actually did, which is permitted. And there's what Eliezer told the family that he did, that would be prohibited. So when Maimonides says, don't do like Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, he's not saying don't do what he did. He's saying, don't do what he said he did, because that is superstition and that's wrong. What did Eliezer do? Eliezer comes to the family, and because they're in a superstitious society, he's not being 100% honest. He's emphasizing this unbelievable thing. Whatever I said happened. It doesn't really matter what you said. It's not the content of the omen. It's the fact, whatever I said happened. Wow, isn't that amazing? They were blown away. They said, it's from God. Why? Because whatever I said happened. If he would say the truth and say, well, it's not exactly what I said happened. Similar, they would say, sorry, no deal. They were not impressed. They're not impressed by the content of the omen. They're impressed by, wow, whatever he said happened, and it must be this, it's from God. What Eliezer actually did wasn't really an omen. It's just a test to see who's kind. And she didn't do what he said. She may have been more kind than what he said. That's not a reason not to take her, because she didn't do exactly what I said. Because we're not looking for an omen that's illogical. We're looking for a logical omen. Find a girl who's kind. That's what I did. I found a girl that was kind. So therefore, Eliezer keeps emphasizing, what are the chances that I came to his town and I found Abraham's cousin, Abraham's family, which is exactly what Abraham told me to do. No, it's not. No, it's not. But that's what he's emphasizing, because he's trying to influence them or manipulate them, call it what you want. But he's trying to highlight how whatever he said worked out. That's an omen. Maimonides says you don't make an omen like that. It's not logical. And the Torah says be wholehearted. Don't look for superstition. You want more information about this, you have to come to the JLI that we're going to do in the spring, which is all about superstition and Judaism. So that we'll do that. That's going to be a 4-week course. So we can elaborate upon that, the 4-week course upon that. But the bottom line is that this is just an example where one perspective, how the subtleties are important, and what Eliezer says is not what happened, and why he changes. There's a lot of significance here. That's just a little taste of what the 3,000 years of commentaries I've been doing during this week when we were all having fun. That's what they were trying to figure out, the changes that Eliezer made. Okay, we have 3 minutes left. I want to conclude with a little bit about the first really marriage in the Torah. Hopefully we could learn some lessons for our relationships, because yes, Adam and Eve got married, but there's no description of the shidduch. There's no description of the marriage. Even Abraham and Sarah, there's no description. The first description of the marriage is in this week's Parsha, how you're taking two people who are very different, coming from different cultures. Isaac is raised in a holy environment. He's completely the introverted. He's not into going and doing kindness. He's introverted. He is considered a sacrifice. God says, the next week's parsha we learn, God says you can't leave Israel because he's completely holy. Whereas Rebecca is the other extreme. She was raised in with people who are less than honest. She's outside of Israel. She's very different than him. She's very giving. She's outgoing. She's compassion and kindness as opposed to judgment. They're very different. They come together, and of course, I don't know the end of the story, but at least here the marriage seems to be working. And interestingly, that is the first time that the Torah describes the marriage. Vayaveh, he married her and he loved her. So this is the Torah doesn't always say it. Maybe it's obvious that marriage implies love. Maybe it's not obvious. I don't know, but it's certainly something that the Torah emphasizes in this parsha. So the question, of course, is could we have in the next 60 seconds or 120 seconds? We'll go 60 seconds extra. Could there anything we can derive from our relationships? So the first thing is based on a concept that we discussed in the last 2 weeks ago in Tanya on Fridays. And the Kabbalistic notion is that every relationship has to have both respect and love. And if you have one without the other, it's like having a bird that has one wing. It's not gonna fly, it's not gonna soar. Beautiful metaphor, you need both. But what we learned a few weeks ago in Tanya, chapter 41, is that between the love and the respect, what comes first? And the Tanya makes the point, respect has to come first. If there's no respect, there's no love. And if you think about it, if the person shows love without respect, first of all, the other person won't be able to receive it as love. And also it could be harmful, because love is, I'm doing what I want to do. This feels good to me, so I'm going to do it. You may not be in the space or in the mood to do this right now, but I'm just sort of going to either be overwhelming or maybe even cause damage. The other example that we said the other Friday is if a person comes home 4 hours late without texting his wife, but he's so in love, he goes and buys her chocolate. So she can't enjoy the chocolate because how come you didn't respect me? How come you didn't tell me I'm waiting for you for 4 hours? How come you didn't text me? So when you have love without awe, not only is it not love without respect, not only is it not respect, it's also not love, or it could be not love. So that's the concept which we spoke about for 30 seconds. I could try to defend that thesis, but it looks like it's alluded to in this week's parsha. Why does it look like it's alluded to in this week's parsha? What happens when they first meet? When they first meet, when Rebecca sees Isaac, the verse describes a scene, but the scene is not necessarily a scene. It's not a love scene. It's not a scene that represents love. It's a scene that represents respect, however you translate these verses. And Rebecca and her maidens arose and rode on their camels, and they followed the man, and the servant took Rebecca and left. Okay, now Isaac was on his way coming from Be'er Lachai Roi, and he dwelt in the land of the south. Isaac went forth to pray in the field toward evening. And he lifted his eyes and saw, and behold, camels were approaching. And Rebekah lifted her eyes and saw Isaac, and she let herself down from the camel. And she said to the servant, who is the man walking in the field toward us? And the servant said, he is my master. And she took the veil and covered herself. Why did she cover herself? What does that mean in that culture? Well, the different commentaries, but at least some of them say it's a sign of respect. A sign of respect. And that so you see the first step is the respect, then the love will come. Then let's look at the marriage. 67, and Isaac brought her to the tent of Sarah, his mother, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. What do you see from here? And Isaac was comforted for the loss of his mother. So the commentaries point out, this is specifically Shamshin Fal Hirsch, Rabbi Shamshin Fal Hirsch, he says something beautiful. He says the love follows the marriage. It doesn't precede the marriage, because we're not talking about romantic love. Someone falls in love, and that love usually does not last forever after. But the idea of love within Judaism is that it increases after the marriage, even before the marriage, because love is based on the time living together and performing kindness to each other. And this relates to the idea that Judaism's understanding of love is not that, you love somebody and therefore you're kind to them and therefore you give to them and therefore you do things for them, but it really works the other way around. And that the giving is not just the cause of love, but is actually the fuel for love. So ultimately, if you think about your life, often the people you love the most are the people you do things for the most. Your children, you love them the most because you're giving them the most. And the giving is what brings along, a byproduct of the giving is the love. And that's what it seems that the Torah is signaling to us, that the marriage is not the culmination of the love. The marriage is the beginning. Not that you couldn't love before the marriage, but the point here is marriage is the beginning of the story. It's not the end of the story. So this is just a little bit of maybe, I would say, relationship advice from the Parsha. Number one, love must be predicated on respect. Number two, the love is not something that is static, but the love is going to grow. And it has to grow. If the kindness continues, then the love will continue. So that's the story in short. A lot more to say. It's 11:03. Questions, comments, of course, always welcome. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Please.
Rabbi?
Yes, please go ahead.
My question relates to the first part of this parsha. Hebron is where the plot that Abraham had purchased, and the thought that I'm having is, knowing that that's very hallowed ground for we as Jews. Can you relate that to why it was given away to the Palestinians in recent time?
That's a good question. The reason why the Hebron was given back to the Palestinians is because Hebron is a city. Well, I'm not justifying it. I'm just stating the fact that Hebron is a city that has 200,000 or more Palestinians. So, but at some point the Israelis decided that they don't want to occupy that many people. So with the Oslo Accords, they gave back all the big cities in the West Bank, including Hebron, even though Hebron itself was given back by Bibi, but I don't want to get into that right now. The bottom line is that the actual cave of Machpelah was not given back and is still in Israel sovereignty and territory, and you can go there. I'm not going to say it's the safest place in Israel, but I have been there since it was been given back, since the city has been given back. We went with extra security, but it's still the actual cave of Machpelah. There's a small little corridor from the cave of Machpelah and all the way to Kiryat Arba, which is here in the Torah. The verse says Kiryat Arba hi Hebron. The Hebron had another name in Kiryat Arba, the city of four. There's a Jewish settlement outside, a city outside of Hebron, which is called Kiryat Arba, with a few thousand people. But in any case, Hebron itself is still under Jewish control.
And is there much violence?
Not Hebron. I'm sorry, not Hebron.
No,
the
I
cave of
understand.
Machpelah, the cave of Machpelah. Yeah.
Is there violence around that area, or is it? You said
It's not considered. The Hebron is considered the. It's not a safe place in the sense that Hebron itself. Hamas has a very strong stronghold in Hebron. So of all the cities, Hebron is the most problematic, probably. But do people go there? Yeah, this week, every year until Corona, but I think this year they're also doing it. This week for this parsha, they have tens of thousands of people who come to Hebron this week, and they read the Torah. They read the Torah reading in the cave of Machpelah. They actually read the story where, of course, where God says that where the Torah says that we purchased it, so it's ours, not just by right of conquest, but it's also because we have title to that land because it was paid for, signed in the presence of everybody. It cannot be refuted. The Rebbe always said that it's ironic that the places that the Gentiles have the most claim that complain and say that we stole from them were really three places historically: Cave of Machpelah, Temple Mountain, and the burial site of Joseph, which is in Shechem. And those are the three places that the Torah specifically said that we purchased it for the full price. King David purchased Temple Mountain for the full price. Abraham purchased Hebron for the Cave of Machpelah for full price. And Jacob bought that territory where eventually Joseph was buried. He also bought it, written clearly in the Torah. So that's the irony. I guess if you want to shake the Jewish people's hold on Israel, you start with the place that is the most firmly ours, and that's why that draws the most attacks. But the reality is that those are the foundations of our inheritance in the land of Israel, because that was the first place we took possession of. Not just by divine promise, but by the permission and the permission of the local inhabitants.
Thank you very much. That was a great explanation.
Thank you. One more thing about Hebron is that there is real estate in Hebron that now is a yeshiva. It's not a Chabad yeshiva, but in the days of so first of all, Chabad has a connection to Hebron. Number one, Rabbi Shneir Zalman, am I going to get this right? The Mithler of his daughter. I should know this. But there's the daughter of the second Chabad Rebbe. Her name was Menucha Rachel. Her last name was Slonim, and she moved to Israel with a big group of Hasidim, and they settled in Hebron. She's buried there, and this is we're going back 200 years. Then, in the early 1900s, the fifth Chabad Rebbe bought a land in Hebron for a yeshiva, for a Chabad yeshiva, and it's called Beit Romano. They have the land, they have the title, and it was there for maybe even 2 decades until the massacre in 1927, when all the Jews in Hebron, Jewish community was basically destroyed because there was a massacre, people were slaughtered, and almost everybody was killed. And after 1967, when Israel retook the land, the Hebron, so they actually, that building, that the title of the building, Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, has title to that building, once again became a Chabad yeshiva, not a Chabad yeshiva, but it became a yeshiva, and I have been in that building. So we have a lot of history, but not just history. Also, we as in Chabad, we have recent history, not as far back as Abraham and the cave of Machpelah, but we also bought real estate in Hebron, and we also still have the title. And it's also, thank God, still being used for Torah study and prayer. So next time you're in Hebron, make sure you see Beit Romano, it's called, and there's a yeshiva there. I think it's called Shevi Hebron, something like that. So when you come there, tell me you want a coffee because you're a Chabad and you have title to that building. So hopefully that will work. Wonderful.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Take care, everybody. Be
Have a
well.
great day.
Thank you. You too.